Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome, despite the warm weather, but a really warm welcome to today's session. So the Auroville Festival kick-started today morning, and this year we have the first quality of the mother, that's sincerity. As Aurovillians, not just in Auroville, but from all across the world, we invite you to really immerse and participate in exploring the depth of this quality, sincerity. The theme, while it is sincerity, we will be exploring the four aspects of the mother: Maheshwari, Mahasaraswati, Mahalakshmi, and Mahakali. So the first 4 days starting today would be exploration of these aspects, and thereafter from day 5 to day 8 will be the aspirational aspect of each of these. So the idea is that these sessions are just not bringing in the rich perspectives, but also bringing in the experience of what these aspirations or these aspects of mother means. They're quite wide, and it's not possible to kind of really go fully into it. But this is for an interaction, for a dialoguing from Aurovillians and from everyone else, to bring in that richness, to engage in the dialogue, to go back to what we all came here for. So today's theme is exploring Maheshwari and the aspect of divine consciousness. I'm just going to invite Nilima to welcome the speakers for today, and it will be a real lovely pleasure to have on dais the speakers.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much for coming here. I take great pleasure in introducing each one of the panelists we have today. We have Manoj Pavitran. Manoj is an integral yoga practitioner coach and founder of the Purnam Center for Integrality in Auroville. He's passionate about helping young pioneers who are dreaming of creating a better world to integrate their spiritual calling with professional success. He has made a film series called Evolution Fast Forward, presenting the vision and work of Sri Aurobindo, integral yoga, parts of the being, and the spiritual history of India in the light of Sri Aurobindo. His films can be found at sopanam.org. He has authored a book, Pilgrims of the Infinite, in poetic prose expressing the essential journey of inner transformation. Thank you, Manoj, for joining us. We then have a very young Shushrut Bade. Shushrut is the disciple of Sri Madhusudan Damle and is CEO of his teacher's Ayurvedic products. Shushrut is also a researcher in Damleji's NGO, Midam Charitable Trust. Shushrut's first book of poems, Rhythm of Spirit, had 34 poems, and his poem, A Father's Song, was appreciated by late former President Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. He holds the records for writing the Isha, Kena, Mandukya, and Sri Aurobindo's Upanishad in rhyme. He has written articles and guest editorials in Sri Aurobindo's Action Journal, and a collection of 34 articles that he authored between 2015 and 18 was published as a book titled A Glimpse of the Spirit. He has also launched a book titled Sri Aurobindo's Vedanta, Rhythm of Ananda at the Pondicherry Auroville Poetry Festival. which is a commentary on Sri Aurobindo's Upanishad, and he's currently researching in collaboration with the Department of Neurology at JIPMA and the National Institute of Persons and Multiple Disabilities. The effect of Vedic chants on children with autism spectrum disorder and other neurodevelopmental disorders. Welcome, Shishod. And then we have Tuan. Tuan is a co-founder of Auroville Consulting, a unit of Auroville which facilitates a two-way flow of information and expertise between Auroville and external professionals and institutions through seminars, workshops, trainings, and consultancy services. Auroville Consultancy focuses on sustainable development-related assignments since its inception in 2010 and has contributed to renewable energy policy design in the country. In Auroville, he first worked for many years on the construction of the Matra Mandir and co-founded and managed several township infrastructure services. He was also a founding member of the Auroville Renewable Energy Group, which later evolved into several Auroville renewable energy units and activities. For a period of 12 years, he held senior management positions in the global renewable energy sector. Tuan also contributes to Auroville's infrastructure planning and development with a focus on energy. And then we have Pashiji. Pashiji first came to the ashram for a brief visit in April 1968 by coincidence that had nothing to do with spiritual seeking, but self-interest of getting his two sons admitted to the ashram school. Finally, he received permission for personal audience with the mother in 1968, which became a turning point in his life. He was introduced during that visit to Navjatji, who then introduced him to Auroville, an experiment he fell in love and volunteered to help. In 1969, with the mother's consent, he started a project called Practical Guide, followed by another project in 1970. She named it Auro Service, and he was formally appointed by the society as a founder director of this activity. The most significant and joyful day was 27th March 1972, when the mother graciously granted him permission to become an Aurovillian. Once in aspiration, he became full-time member of Auro Future and a close collaborator for Roger along with Prem Malik and Ramanathan. He took initiative to create a trust for benefit of Auroville named Auro Service the Auroville, perhaps the first trust, and in collaboration with Roger and Auro Future successfully negotiated and executed many town planning and other projects all over India in the next few years. At 91, he's a co-coordinator of the project Siru, the second most important project after Matra Mandir on behalf of ATDC. The current avatar of Auro Future, and you have, yes, Lavanya de Auroville. Welcome, Pashiji. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Nilima. And it's a pleasure to have all of you on the dais. And as we said, that the aspect of the mother that we would explore today is Maheshwari. I would just kind of set the context for the audience what Maheshwari is. Imperial Maheshwari is seated in the wideness about thinking mind and will and sublimates and greatens them into wisdom and largeness or floods with a splendor beyond them. For she is the mighty and wise, who opens us to the supramental infinites and the cosmic vastness, to the grandeur of the supreme light, to a treasure house of miraculous knowledge, to the measureless movement of the mother's eternal forces. Tranquil is she, wonderful, great, and calm forever. Nothing can move her because all wisdom is in her. Nothing is hidden from her. She comprehends all things and all beings and their nature and what moves them and how. All that is and must be. A strength is in her that meets everything and masters, and none can prevail in the end against a vast, intangible wisdom and high tranquil power. equal, patient, and unalterable inner will, she deals with men according to their nature and with things and happenings according to their force and the truth that is in them. Partiality she has none, but she follows the decree of the Supreme, and some she raises up, and some she casts down or puts away into the darkness. To the wise, she gives a greater and a more luminous wisdom. Those that have vision, she admits to her counsels. On the hostile, the consequences of their hostility, the ignorant and foolish, she leads according to their blindness. In each man, she answers and handles the different elements of his nature according to their need and their urge and the return they call. Puts on them the required pressure or leaves them to their cherished liberty to prosper in ways of the ignorance or to perish. For she is above all, bound by nothing, attached to nothing in the universe. Yet she has more than any other the heart of the universal mother. For her compassion is endless and inexhaustible. All are to her eyes her children and portions of the one. Even the Asura and the Rakshasa and the Pisacha and those that are revolted and hostile. Even her rejections are only a postponement, her punishments a grace. But her compassion does not blind her wisdom or turn her action from the course decreed. For the truth of things is her one concern, knowledge her center of power, and to build our soul and our nature into the divine truth, her mission and her labor. So the way we would do is, to each one I will give a context. The exploration is of the dimension of the truth and the power of Maheshwari. Inviting each one of you to share what your perspective is on that for about 8 minutes, and then depending on what's shared, we invite you to reflect, share, add, whatever that feels like, and then we throw open any question and answer that the audience may have. So the first is Shushruth Bade. Inviting you what you think is, so there is divinity and there is religion. So in your perspective, what is your understanding of divinity and religion, or divinity versus religion?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, namaste to everyone. I feel very blessed to be here in Auroville on this very special day. Since we are meditating on the mother and trying to understand, I think I would just start with one small mantra for the mother. Mamba Lalita Devi Brahmananda Sagari Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. So your question was on divinity versus religion. If we see divinity and religion, religion has come in place for identifying divinity. Some way somebody needs to recognize the divine, a way needs to be first paid. But that is not the only way. When there is a imposition, then that becomes a problem. If we see how Mother has asked us to look at religion, she has used very beautiful words how our approach should be. She has said that we must have an awakened indifference or an enlightened indifference towards religions. Meaning we are not looking at religion as something which needs to be discarded, but we are not getting what we can say bound by the religion also. And towards worshippers also she has said benevolent goodwill towards worshippers. Basically religion is also for understanding consciousness, or maybe recognizing the way, but somewhere down the line, once this is the way, when it becomes this is the only way, that becomes a problem. Everywhere this exclusiveness is what is crushing the freedom. Consciousness is only in freedom. Probably in Auroville also, why people love this place so much is because of the consciousness. Here there is a consciousness of freedom for everyone to progress. But again, as we opened up, there is the need to go beyond the mind. But we all perceive everything through our, we can say, mind first, maybe senses, and then the mind. How do we go beyond that is again a question. If we look at different traditions, there are different methods. If you see Bhagavad Gita, in the Gita, Krishna has told Indriyanam paranyahur indriyebhya param manaha manasastu para buddhi yo buddhe paratastu saha, wherein the first level is the level of the senses, where we perceive everything, then the mind processes it. The mind is also having a limitation. Higher than mind, there is something buddhi, and even higher than that is the divine, and probably that is where the mother or Maheshwari's role comes into play. For us, if we want to be receptive to the grace, to the manifestation of her will, we will have to first probably surrender. Religion initially teaches us surrender, but somewhere in the mother's path, religion is not something which is to be discarded, but it has to be transcended, because divinity, when we do this divinity, sometimes, like we say, divinity versus religion. So many times, like mother was asked some questions by sadhaks. She had said that some don't want to change, so they choose to not go into, they don't worship also, they don't change also. But the sadhana is for transformation of our nature. Somewhere for transformation of nature, there is a requirement to surrender to the divine will. Maybe one thing we can probably recognize is, at least like the mother said, a benevolent goodwill for the worshippers. Those who are following other religions, instead of, we can probably not ridicule them, but allow them to go on their path. The other path is different, the mother's path is different from it. We can recognize it with an indifference which is not cold, but an awakened one. And again, for the awakening, there is a need for raising the consciousness. And the best way that can happen, like if you see, even the goddess is, when we surrender to her, then her will starts functioning through us. If we see it is like today's topic also, of wisdom and divine consciousness. And there is divine consciousness all around us, but are we conscious of it? It is again, we require grace to be conscious of it. Otherwise, we can live in divine consciousness and still not experience anything. And for that, again, to understand that, probably I feel surrender is very essential. So divinity versus religion, probably if we can take out the versus part, and divinity, we can say is, religions contain divinity, but divinity cannot be contained in religion. Divinity is that which is beyond religion as well. And that way Sri Aurobindo has beautifully, in his yoga, it is about transcending. It is a Purna yoga where there is no negation. Like in the Upanishads also, we have one end is Vidya, another end is Avidya, and there is something which is about a reconciliation. There's no compromise, but both ends are understood, and then the person goes ahead. I think that is something which is essential. For that, again, it is to become conscious of the mother, and sometimes becoming a child in the mother's, under her care. It is the easiest thing, because that is where we can raise our own abilities. Maybe we are now in the sense-based perceptions, our own attachments are controlling us. We are not able to rise above that. We'll have to probably surrender, and then that mother will only raise us slowly. But there is a big, long road, a sunlit path which Sri Aurobindo has kept for all of us. To tread on that, we will have to rise beyond the, what we can say, the first levels. And Sri Aurobindo's levels, I had made a mistake of trying to use my mind and write down what each of these, what is mind, what is higher mind, what is over mind, what is illumined mind, what is super mind. I wrote a nice 80-page book, and then I felt the best thing to do for that would be press the delete button, because these are not exact, these are mental, it was just a mental division or distinction. But that is something beyond, it is something which is like today's work, it is consciousness, and maybe if we are sincere, the mother will grant us the wisdom. Even that is told in the Bhagavad Gita also. Krishna says, Dadami buddhi yogam tam, I will grant you that wisdom to go ahead into the, he was the Lord of the overmind. So if that wisdom is required, probably again I feel surrender is the thing. Maybe like today's topic of sincerity. As we are sincere, we will receive. Maheshwari is all powerful. She is all vast. She is beyond our understanding. She is like an ocean. And Sri Aurobindo is also always, consciousness is always accompanied as a trinity. Sat, Chit and Ananda. Truth, consciousness and bliss. So, and again, truth is also something which is vast, like Maheshwari only. Satyam, Rutam, Bruhat is the Vedic word, where it is vast like the sky. To understand that, to remain in the mother's grace, to not receive Maheshwari's wrath also, we probably have to be sincere, and I think that would be the best thing, and sincerity will help us, as well as this question of divinity versus religion. Maybe we can recognize certain religions, they are there. We need not ridicule them, because if we ridicule, we will lower our consciousness. But maybe if the road which we are not taking, we need not worry about that road. We can still go ahead on our road. That is what I feel. Yes, Ji.
Thank you.
Yes,
So
thank
what
you.
I hear you say is religion is a starting point,
Ji.
contains divinity, but divinity is not contained within the religion.
Yes.
You mentioned about awakened indifference and benevolent goodwill.
Yes, Ji.
And in this journey is an individual choice,
Ji.
and that surrender kind of comes in.
Yes.
And there is no knowing through the mind, but to even surrender that and to allow grace
Ji. Ji.
to continue to guide you as you're on the path.
Ji. Ji. Yes,
Thank you
Ji.
so much. We'll
Thank
come
you.
back to you.
Yes,
Pashiji. She deals with each according to need and nature. To the wise, she gives a greater and more luminous wisdom. Those that have vision, she admits to her counsels. On the hostile, she imposes the consequences of their hostility. To the ignorant and foolish, she leads according to their blindness. What are your reflections, your experiences? What are your thoughts on this?
My perception. If you need, because I've lost my voice a bit, I'll try and do my best.
Just hold the mic closer to you.
You see, my understanding of this aspect is that, as Sri Aurobindo says, that the evolution has an involute, which is divine consciousness, say into so concentrated like the black hole that he named it inconscient. From inconscient to evolve to that divine consciousness is the part and parcel of the process of physical, vital, mental, psychic and spiritual development. In that stage, we human beings today, in various stages of our own individual evolution, stand and perceive consciousness, values, knowledge, skills, and in the context, from the time that knowledge started evolving because of the mind and intellect, we also started discovering things which could help us with our day-to-day life, with many other things and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the mind's what Sri Aurobindo called is static surrender. Positive of it is dynamic surrender. And when I talk about the static and the positive, I talk about the knowledge, which is good for the static surrender, perhaps. But dynamic surrender comes only if there's a wisdom behind it. And that wisdom, in Indian context, we have called it Maheshwari, aspect of the divine consciousness. Manifesting aspect of the divine consciousness, the mother. For me, it is operative at every level, but depending on your understanding and consciousness. If you are ritualistic, you go to the temple and worship, come home and you're normal. If you're inquisitive and you want to know what does it do for you, how can you choose between the negative and positive at a given time? You cannot do it if you do not have the support of that wisdom. Mother made it easier for us to understand, because when we go into the Vedic era or into the Sanatana Dharma aspects, we have different interpretations. But by giving it a new language that is also enshrined in Mother Mandir, wisdom, knowledge, energy, power, beauty and harmony, she has synthesized all the four aspects where the knowledge can be the one which can give us the possibility of discriminating what negative can be converted into positive, which is the objective of this beautiful adventure in consciousness called Auroville. That's my perception. In that context, my own feeling is, instead of being wise, it is, starting point is to be humble, to understand what it means. Thank you.
Yeah, quite a few points that you made. It's also in terms of when you talk about humility and sincerity, you also talk about the ability to discern. And I think we'll come back to it because these are interesting points, because that in itself, the ability to discern, combined with what we talked about, awakened indifference and benevolent goodwill. How does one evoke it, practice it, and even stay on it and know it? So coming to you, maybe Manoj, is the interesting element is truth. Truth built in our soul and nature, her mission and work. Her compassion does not blind her wisdom or turn her action from the course decreed. For the truth of things is her one concern. Knowledge, her center of power, and to build our soul and nature into the divine truth, her mission and labor. Truth. As simple as it sounds, it's also not as simple. So what's your take on this, on these lines, where we're saying that there is truth which is built in our soul, and our work and our nature is pursuit of this? What is your understanding, your experience, and
Thank you, Sudha, and thank you, everyone. I remember when, in my early 20s, when I felt I was lost and I was searching for truth or knowledge. Even at that time, these precise definitions or vocabulary did not exist. You just have a thirst to find out, to know. And I went through reading many masters, and I remember coming across Sri Aurobindo. And this sense of entering into a vast ocean, Maheshwari. But I did not know what I was entering into, but my mind was and soul was so happy, drinking all that he was saying, I thought I understood. Later I understood that I did not. But something was pouring in. Something of that vast wisdom was pouring in. And it was much later I understood Maheshwari's presence and that vast comprehensive wisdom and that tranquil power. And over the years, I realized the more my mental interpretations, my struggle to understand through the mind, through thinking, through effort, when that is renounced and you relax into that ocean of her presence, that's when she can enter and mold the mind, take up our mental structures, dissolve them, reformat them through that tranquility. In fact, you experience that increasing peace, increasing stillness, increasing silence, and yet a growing clarity of seeing. And your mind is getting restructured. The truth of her force and light is entering and forming the mind. And that gives the strength, kind of an inner strength that is unshakable. So truth become almost like substance of your being. It gives you strength, clarity of seeing. And from there arise the action of that stillness that arise as things to do. And in that context, again, this simple words like sincerity, which is the theme of this month, I used to think that I knew the word sincerity. It is so simple. But it is only when I began to apply it in terms of, say, when you set a reference, say, to speak only truth. When you have that reference, with respect to that, sincerity become applicable. You see that you were not sincere, or you were sincere, and you're off or on the spot. Or any goal you set and commit with respect to that, the word sincerity come alive. Otherwise, we are applying the word sincerity to anything that is popping up. I am very sincere in my expressions. So from there to live sincerity with reference to that divine guidance that is coming and committing to that, and then to discover that only some parts of you are willing to be sincere, there are parts that are revolting, and to surrender them so that they are transformed by that wisdom that gently, compassionately takes up and molds, reformats, dissolves the resistance and integrates your being. An integral sincerity begins to develop. And truth become more and more of that very substance of your being. Truth become increasingly the substance that gives you very existence and tranquil, and you're standing on that, and that enables you to stand up, face the world, and truth of your being. Out of that comes the Swadharma and the law of action. The more mind is silent, better it is. And you don't rely on the mental interpretations, but more on that dynamic becoming that arise from that stillness. That substance transforming itself into word and into action. So that's how I look at it.
And as I was listening to you, I think my mind also kind of raised questions, because if I, so when you said that there are paths that are resisting and there are paths that offer. And then on this path, the resistance and the surrender, how do we carry that along, and what is needed at a level? Because at an individual level, there may be moments that I may not really have that inner strength and being. The second is the truth of the things. What do I see as truth and what someone else sees as truth? When that comes face to face with each other, there is belief of each and conviction that this is my truth. So how does one hold what truth is even in that moment? Because there is a perspective that each one holds on to. So in that environment, how does a dialogue even begin? And when there is surrender, how do I even define that quality of the surrender to what it is? So I would, hold on to that, because I think it's interesting that the second, and I mean the last part, that Tuang, is the sincerity in the divine consciousness that you left up to. The truth or the truth itself. The truth and the truth that as I perceive it. We want the truth. I think that's our inherent nature. For most men, it is what they want that they label truth. The Auroville must want the truth, whatever it may be. In the context that is today, and given what Shushruth, Vashiji, Manoj shared, and in this line, what is your offering? What has been your journey like, and what is it that you understand of this?
Before I do so, in our high school we had a drama group. So every year we would perform a drama like the ashram does. And in the last 2 years of that of my high school years, I was in charge of sound and light of the drama group, and also a bit of the scenery. And what happened is, sometimes during a rehearsal, when one of the actors would not turn up, I was called from the sound and light cabin and asked, can you please do this act, because this fellow has not turned up. So I feel a bit like this today. I am normally doing sound, light, making things work, and now you have put me on the stage with very difficult questions that, quite frankly, I don't have any answers to. So what I did was, I have very sincerely, after I was invited to come here on Saturday, I have been studying on two concepts. One is sincerity, which is the overall theme of this whole month, I'm told, and on truth. Right? Because actually the answers to all these questions are very much there with Sri Aurobindo and the mother. In one of the letters on yoga, in one of the volumes, Letters on Yoga, he writes to a disciple, he gives an exact definition of what sincerity is, Sri Aurobindo. What is meant by sincere? The disciple had asked. And Sri Aurobindo replies, sincerity means to accept the divine influence only and not that of lower forces. That is sincerity. In another letter, when the same question was asked, he answers, sincerity means to be turned wholly to the divine and accept only the divine impulses. It means also the true and constant will or effort to be like this. And there are many more. I give another example. He says sincerity means much more than honesty. It means that you mean what you say, feel what you profess, are earnest in your will. As the sadhak aspires to be an instrument of the divine and one with the divine, sincerity in him means that he is really in earnest in his aspiration and refuses all other will or impulse except the divine's. So it is very clear from, and there are many more, I have 2 sheets of these definitions. It is very clear when you read through this that sincerity is a condition precedent for the whole yoga. If you don't have sincerity, you don't even start with the yoga, right? He also links sincerity with divine consciousness in the life divine. The earlier part that I quoted was from Letters on Yoga, but in the life divine I found several interesting quotes where he talks about sincerity and linking it with divine consciousness. Then he says, for example, straightforwardness means simply to be honest with oneself and with the divine and not to be crooked in one's ways. Self-justification is unwillingness to recognize a mistake and attempt to prove oneself right even against the censure of the mother. Then he says, divine consciousness possesses that play and delight eternally and inalienably, our essential being, our real self, which is concealed from us by the false self or mental ego, also enjoys that play and delight eternally and inalienably and cannot indeed otherwise since it is one in being with the divine consciousness. All this is linked with sincerity. So I would say that the theme that you have selected for this conference is very interesting as the first theme because it is the first condition which is very clear from this text. Now on your question about the truth, there also I did some research because there I found something of the mother which takes care of it fully. In fact, very often what happens is that all these questions are sometimes even in one sentence and expressed differently. So the mother says about truth, it is very easy to say, that is the truth. Now I know that it is true and I shall not think otherwise. This is very easy and in fact something has suddenly put you in touch with a light. You have had an experience, you have become conscious of yourself, conscious of something which transcends you and is the reality of your being. So for you it is perfect. But do not imagine that you must go from door to door, from city to city, country to country, telling people, I proclaim the truth. Because what is true for you may not be at all good for another. What you have seen has its truth in itself, everything has its truth in itself, but the true raison d'être of this truth is that it has helped you to find yourself, to find the truth of your being. And it may be quite possibly not help your neighbor, unless you have a considerable power of persuasion and oblige him to see things as you have seen them yourself, but this has not much value. And then she gives an example which is very nice. I met in Japan one of the sons of Tolstoy. He was going around the world preaching human unity. He had caught this from his father and was going everywhere in the world preaching human unity. I met him at some friend's place and asked him, how are you going to realize this human unity? Do you know what reply he gave me? He said, oh, it's very simple. If everybody spoke the same language, if everybody dressed in the same manner, if everybody lived in the same manner, the whole world would be united. Then I told him, that would be a poor world not worth living in. He did not understand me. So truth is relative. Truth is not the object by itself. Truth is to find your inner being, is what she clarifies here. So that is my initial contribution on sincerity and on truth.
Thank you for that It's interesting that you also shared the story of one is bringing in the sameness, but that's not the truth. And coming back to the question, Manoj, that I'd asked earlier, what would you have to say to that? Given the fact that one is, we say truth is knowing the inner being. We also talked about it's a journey, paths there, paths not there. But also the truth when it is in dialoguing, when there is a perception that probably exists as a wheel. How do we, in that moment, bring that space, bring that dialoguing, bring in that effort that what is truth even there? Especially when one holds on to that version of truth, knowing that this is truth for me and that's my inner being, which is where somewhere we are also seeing what's happening in the world.
Yeah, if truth is something that you reduce into some mental structure, some mental map, and then you're listening to others. While you're listening, you're trying to fit that into your mental map. That's purely at a mind level. At a level below, at the level of energies, when a dialogue is happening, it is not just a cognitive process. There is an exchange of energies trying to blend, trying to dance together. Either they are fighting with each other or dancing with each other, finding the synchronization at an energetic level. If that is not happening, no amount of mental analysis and trying to arrive at will not work. So, in the process of dialogue, if we are able to receive the other, not at a mental structural level, but energetically to receive. When you receive another person's energy, you can directly sense the state of the being. What is the inner state of the being? Whether it is restless, whether it is at peace, whether it is in conflict with itself. And that is the energy that enters into you. And if you are not established in a deeper inner peace and stillness, you will be swept off by it, you will be formatted by it, and your own thinking get scrambled if what is coming in is a disturbed energy, or disturbed emotion, disturbed force. So, when we refer to dialogue, usually we are referring to something that is happening at an intellectual, mental level. But there is a whole underlying dimension. Unless there we establish peace. And if the mind is able to sense there is fear, there is anxiety, there is an internal division. And on the top of it, often what is below the surface is not visible to the one who is perhaps saying something, and they are upset by you, but the same flaw they are pointing at you is there within, and they are not able to see it. And if you happen to point that out, or usually in the dialogue what happens is attempt to convince and trying to expose, saying that, see, can't you see your own flaw and your own limitation in your own arguments? It backfires normally. I haven't seen that working. Unless there is sufficient ground for I have been heard, I have been received, not necessarily agreed, just you have been heard. And there is this need to be heard. And this is something that is deeply missing in today's world. Everyone is trying to convince the other. There is very little listening and receiving. And listening is an act of love. So if we can even just provide a space to listen, that will be a great starting point. And while listening, learning to establish and dissolve and be at peace, so that all that is coming from the other is entering you and entering into a deep, peaceful harmony. Only from that space, if we are able to express something, that might get through or might enter into a harmonious exchange. Otherwise, there is no possibility. We will be throwing and trying to solve something at a mental level, whereas issues are much deeper and veiled. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Hashichi, you wanted to say something.
Mention a specific point so I can speak.
So in your conversation when you talked about, I think, dynamic surrender and a static surrender, and if I were to bring in this context and your own experience, because you've been quite a journey on this.
Let me share with you my personal experience. I haven't shared it with many before. As it was mentioned in my introduction, that I came to ashram by a chance to look for a good value-based education for my children. My background is that at the age of 15, I was a nationalist, all for Gandhi and independence of India. At the age of 18, I was a socialist, founded a young organization called Young Youth Socialist League. At the age of 20, I was a cardholder member of CPI. And causing strikes in industrial areas in Delhi. At the age of 21, I had an opportunity to go to England to learn to become an engineer. The communism part of my attachment followed me. I was introduced to the leftists in Cambridge and Oxford universities, meetings, conferences, discussions. And at that time, I also fell in love with a beautiful girl. So I had an invitation to go to Moscow to participate in a youth festival or to decide to get married to my wife, my girlfriend. I chose to marry my girlfriend. At the age of 25, I became a wage earner to take care of my wife and myself, my parents, and so on and so forth. Fortunately, at a young age of 36, 34, 35, earlier 32, the company that I worked as a service engineer in gave me the opportunity to become the chief executive and director of that company. So the British company. When I came to ashram, Brown Sahib, earning 18,000 rupees a month in gross salary, member of 3 clubs, including golf club, the best of the world. Enjoying my life thoroughly, and by that time blessed by 3 children also. Could afford to send my children to any one of the best schools. But there was a kink in my mind. I wanted a value-based education. I had come in contact with Jadu Krishnamurti. Used to attend his lectures and so on and so forth. So I wanted to go to Rishi Valley to get my children admitted and also talk to J. Krishnamurti about his philosophy and my feelings. In another way, somehow I was led to Pondicherry because this also has a value-based school. I met Kiritwai, who was the registrar at that time. So I mentioned my wish to him. And I said, I would like to know how this education is conducted. His answer was, please have a look around. So I wait, hoping somebody will come with me. Nobody. So he smiles. Go, you're free to move in anywhere, anywhere. Room to room, I peep in. In one room, I quietly go and sit down at a back bench, where everybody's quiet. And suddenly, one of the young students asks the teacher, addresses him as a bhai, not as sir, not as a teacher, but bhai. And asks a question. What surprised me was, the teacher looks up and says, sorry, I do not know the answer. Shall we go to the library and find out the answer? I haven't ever experienced that in my life before. I come back. I say, this is the right place for my children. Gives me 2 forms because I wanted 2 sons. One was at that time 11, another at 13. So I said, what are the formalities for admission? Just fill up the forms. Thank you very much. What is the fee? There's no fee. Is there any donation? No, there's no donation. Sir, how do you decide whom to take and whom not to take? The mother decides. I look at the pictures behind his desk. Being cynical as I was at those days, you mean this old lady? And you are sitting in a responsible position as a registrar? Smiles and he says, this is how it is. Can I meet the mother? She gives 4 audiences in a year. Public audiences. A big question in my mind. On one hand, such a beautiful system where I saw all the facilities for free. On the other hand, is impossibility of an old lady deciding, I don't know how. Can I meet the mother one-to-one? That's the answer. No reply. I'm curious. The person who had brought me here, I asked him, is there something I can read about this place to understand what it is? why this rational and irrational at the same time, according to me. So we go to the sabda. So I asked the man behind the counter, in most of the ashrams, the disciples write about their gurus. Have your gurus written anything on their own? Smiles, comes back to me and he says, poetry or prose? I said, I am not a poetic kind of a man. Prose is good enough for me. What would be, according to you, the recommendation that would give me the insight to what it is all about? He says it is something called, Sri Aurobindo's work, The Life Divine. It's okay, I'll have it. He says it is in 3 volumes because centenary edition had not come at that time. I'll take 3 volumes, wrap them up, rushed back, because at that time I was living in Calcutta. My friend was so disgusted with me because he was a devotee. And I was showing no respect. When we reached the airport, he asked me to get out of his car. Whilst I had 4 hours between the flight from that time, my luggage was at his place. He says, I'll pack up and send your luggage, but I don't want to see your face anymore. Waiting for the flight and the luggage, I opened to read The Life Divine. I couldn't believe it because I was reading it like a novel. Maybe I did not understand any word of in its content. Content I understood. 3 weeks, finished reading. Now I'm looking for somebody to help me come and visit the mother because I have jotted down some questions and I want answers. This was in my first visit in April of 68. I get an opportunity to come to the mother in June. 7:18 a.m. Not 7:15, not 7:30, not 7:18. The friend who finally brings me to the ashram gets up early in the morning, brings a bouquet of flowers for me to take to the mother. So I am present at 7:18, but being stubborn and stupid, I take 1 flower to offer to her, not the bouquet, because I'm not a devotee. I'm asking questions. My name is called. I walked in. The old lady looks up. Our eyes are locked. When I come back to my senses, I have my head in her lap. A miracle has happened. Rationality and irrationality, I understand it thoroughly. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I think it was a beautiful way of bringing in, synthesizing what Swan, Manoj and Shushut shared. I don't know whether the audience has any question. To me, I think this was an example of where the mind has so many questions to wanting to know, to comprehend truth. And it's a journey of humility and sincerity of a true seeker. But yet willing to be in the unknown, to drop even that, and which is where I think the aspects of the surrender, what you talked about, the benevolent goodwill, and what indifference did you mention? Awakened indifference. I think those are the two wings that I think to be held on to, and yet allowing parts to come in. To me, it sounds like a journey. It's not something that will happen overnight unless there is the grace who just decides to make it happen. And maybe to be even ready for that moment. And for that to happen, I guess we just need to put our effort. I don't know whether anyone else has questions. If not, I would just like to thank each one of you. This is quite vast. I feel very privileged. I feel very honored. Questions are there, of course, because the mind wants to know. It's more curious, it's more inquisitive. But I think this is a good start of being able to sit in what does sincerity really mean. And being sincere means what? Bringing in the aspects of listening, but what am I listening to and who am I listening to? And whether I'm willing to, at that moment, stay open to listening to both. To be able to call out on my own before I can call out on the other. And the definition of the truth as you gave by the mother, I would like to end this, if you could read that line again, to take that forward.
It is very easy to say that that's true. Now I know that it is true and I shall not think otherwise. This is very easy, and in fact something has suddenly put you in touch with a light. You have had an experience. You have become conscious of yourself, conscious of something which transcends you and is the reality of your being. So for you it is perfect. But do not imagine that you must go from door to door, from city to city, country to country, telling people, I proclaim the truth. Because what is true for you may not be at all good for another. What you have seen has its truth in itself. Everything has its truth in itself. But the true raison d'etre of this truth is that it has helped you to find yourself, to find the truth of your being. And it may be quite possibly not help your neighbor unless you have a considerable power of persuasion and oblige him to see things as you have seen them yourself. But this has not so much value.
Thank you so much. And with that, we sign off for today's session. Does anybody have any questions, or we can happily close here? Yeah.
Question two.
You switched it off, I guess.
Hello. Yeah. So this is to anyone, whoever wishes to answer. There is a very nuanced difference between learned and being wise. So is it possible? And we know that even if you're illiterate, you can be wise. So in that sense, is it possible to be sincere towards the mother and the consciousness without knowing that you are sincere? You know, and how in the concept of Auroville, we often judge each other if the other person is sincere or not, or my sincerity is a little higher than the other's sincerity. So, what is your views on it? Thank you.
So you answer and then we'll have
Acha.
Pashiji answer.
Okay. This is a very nice.
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm audible. Yes. It's a very nice question about sincerity, and even without knowing. Now, this reminded me of a poetess who was an illiterate poetess, a widow from Maharashtra, that is my home state. Her name was Bahinabai Chaudhary. She grew up as a, she was a widow. Yes. She was a widow, and she didn't get a chance to learn anything. She couldn't go for pilgrimages. She did not get a chance to go to temples, and her entire job was to put food on the table. For that, she worked in the fields because her children had to get educated. Now, while she was working in the field, she began singing. People thought she is a mad lady. What is she singing? Nobody knew what she was singing, and there was nobody there to even note down what she was singing. But in her home, whatever she used to say, her son would note it down because he felt it is something valuable. And then she passed away. Nobody knew anything about her writing, but because of her efforts, her son got educated. Then he met somebody called Acharya Atre in Maharashtra. He was a great educationalist. When he said, my mother's books are there. One book I have written, her small poems. And the language was also a local dialect, not a proper, perfect. Means her words is also like that. Mazi Maya Sorosoti, Maza Shikavite Boli. Now we say Saraswati. She would say Soroswati. She teaches me how to speak. In the field, where will she learn? How did she learn? She says the wind, now as we can hear in Auroville, the beautiful rustling of the leaves. She says rustling of the leaves is telling the coming and going of Panduranga. So what she learned there, and when this educationist saw that, he had goosebumps. He said, this is pure gold. And then it got published, and now people are doing PhD on her poems. Baina Bainche Gane, or songs of Baina Bain. So we need not know we are sincere or anything, but we have to, as I think was a beautiful experience, even sir also shared of his with mother, and it was so palpable that even now sir is feeling when we were all as if we are in that moment, because I think we need to be sincere, and that is all matters. Somebody else is sincere or not. There may be fights, but generally, like my teacher also says, I think mother also said, when two people fight, both are wrong. So why do we have to hold on to one person's view or another person's view? If we are sincere, mother will manifest, because wanting somebody to understand will not make anybody understand. And in Rig Veda also there's one last verse which is similar to as sir's story about how Tolstoy's son was saying all should be one. Well, sam gachadvam, sam vadadvam, sam vo manasi janatam, deva bhagam yatha sarve, sanjanana upasate, samano mantra samiti samani. And finally the answer is sahachittam esha, means so consciousness is one, then their oneness is possible. But for consciousness is one, means even in two people, if in a relationship there are arguments, somewhere there should be one sutra, some place where, like for example, surrender to the mother. Maybe two people can fight as much as they want, but at least that one point is there that will make all the, all the ups and downs will be past, is what I feel. And as sir has asked about sincerity, even if we are not conscious, we know somewhere inside when we are not sincere. As Manojji said, which part of me is rebelling, which part of me is not listening. This is something which I like it, but I want this. Probably something like that. Yes, you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mother used to give blessing packets. Everyone. So I'm sharing with you something which Udar shared with me. Because he had the freedom at times to ask mother questions which others will dare not. And his question was, Mother, if somebody intends to murder and asks you for a blessing packet, will you give? What he asks and what I give in the blessing are two different things. But I'll give him the blessing packet.
Yeah, I think we should end it on that blessing note. Thank you so much for each one of you to bring in such diverse but yet somewhere having the element of truth and bringing back us to what it is to start all over again and each day to just start. So thank you so much and really, really grateful.